In 1991, a group of civilian divers stumbled upon something that didn't make sense. A submarine resting where no submarine should be. What they uncovered over the next several years would rewrite history and raise chilling new questions. Because when they finally got inside, what salvage divers found inside the sunken Nazi Germany submarine will leave you speechless. This is the true story of U-869. And it begins with a mystery at the bottom of the sea, the ghost sub of World War II. In the dark, churning waters of the Atlantic during World War II, death could come without warning, without mercy, from below. German U-boat prowled beneath the waves like sharks, silent and unseen, sinking thousands of Allied ships with cold precision. These submarines were Hitler's weapon of terror at sea, cutting off vital supply routes and leaving behind a trail of steel and oil. Of the hundreds of U-boat launched by Nazi Germany during the war, most were sunk, some were captured, a few vanished without a trace. And one of the most mysterious of all was U-869. Launched in 1943, U-869 was a Type 9 C-40 U-boat, one of the largest long-range submarines built by the Marine. Nearly 250 feet long and equipped with 6 torpedo tubes, it was designed to travel across the Atlantic and strike enemy ships deep in Allied-controlled waters. Its mission: disrupt, destroy, disappear. U-869 was commanded by Captain Helmut Neuerberg, a seasoned naval officer. In late 1944, as the tides of war turned against Germany, U-869 was sent on its first combat patrol. The plan, according to wartime records, was to head to the Gibraltar area, a strategic choke point where Allied ships funneled through the Mediterranean. But there was chaos in the German command structure by then, communication errors, conflicting orders, and a collapsing chain of command. It's believed that U-869's mission may have changed en route. On February 11, 1945, a U.S. destroyer and a Coast Guard cutter reported attacking and sinking an unidentified German U-boat near Gibraltar. The official report chalked it up as a confirmed kill. Based on timing and projected U-boat movements, the Allies concluded that the submarine destroyed that day was U-869. The Marine, defeated and fragmented, offered no contradictory account. And so the story was settled. U-869 was presumed sunk off the coast of Gibraltar, taking all 56 of its crew with it to a watery grave. No survivors, no distress calls, no trace. For decades, no one questioned this version of events. It was one line in the massive blood-soaked ledger of World War II. One more enemy sub that never came home. But when you look closer, the story starts to crack. First, there were no confirmed photographs or sonar images of a wreck near Gibraltar matching the dimensions or signature of U-869. Wartime reports were notoriously unreliable, often based on visual confirmation in chaotic combat conditions or guesses made under pressure. The Atlantic was vast, the technology primitive, and mistakes were common. Second, no German documentation from that period ever clearly stated U-869's final position. By 1945, Germany's war machine was falling apart. Radio traffic was lost. Records were incomplete or destroyed. The few logs that did survive were often ambiguous. Some experts now believe that U-869 may have never even reached the Strait of Gibraltar at all. And there was another more chilling detail: the radio silence. German U-boat were required to report during missions, both to confirm their progress and to receive new orders. U-869 was last heard from while still in the North Atlantic, thousands of miles from its supposed death site. After that, nothing. Silence, as if the ocean itself had swallowed it whole. The deeper historians and researchers dug, the more questions they found. Was the submarine misidentified in that battle off Gibraltar? Was it rerouted without anyone knowing? Or was something far more unusual at play? For over 40 years, U-869 remained an unresolved mystery. Ghost ship lost to time, buried in conflicting reports and fading memories. Families of the crew had no grave to visit, no wreckage to mourn, just a name etched on a memorial and a wartime file that didn't quite add up. Even the experts couldn't agree. Military historians pointed to the Gibraltar attack and insisted that the case was closed. But divers, wreck hunters, and amateur sleuths weren't so sure. And decades later, something strange showed up on sonar off the coast of New Jersey. Salvage divers were quick to check, and what they found will leave you speechless. The Jersey Mystery. The North Atlantic off the coast of New Jersey is a graveyard of steel. Beneath the waves lie hundreds of wrecks, victims of storms, collisions, and wars. For local divers, it's both playground and a puzzle. But in the summer of 1991, a group of wreck divers found something unlike anything they'd ever seen. At the time, John Chatterton, Richie Kohler, and a small team of experienced Northeast divers were searching for unidentified wrecks using side-scan sonar. The waters off the coast were notoriously dangerous. Strong currents, low visibility, deep dives. These were not casual descents. This was technical diving, high-risk exploration that demanded planning, precision, and nerves of steel. Roughly 60 miles off the coast of Point Pleasant, New Jersey, at a depth of 230 feet, their sonar lit up with an image. It was a long, narrow object, torpedo-shaped, lying on the ocean floor. Something man-made, something old. But what? Curiosity turned to obsession. When they made their first dive on the wreck, visibility was terrible, barely a few feet. The cold bit through their suits. The structure was partially buried in sand and tangled in decades of fishing nets. A few passes around it confirmed the obvious. This was a submarine. A big one. And it wasn't supposed to be there. They couldn't see any whole numbers or markings at first. There was no nameplate, no plaque, no flags, nothing that would say what vessel this was. The structure was badly damaged. This conning tower partially collapsed and its outer hull cracked. It was rusting slowly into oblivion. Was it American, Russian, German? No one knew. And that's when the divers gave it a nickname. Yohu. Yohu was a riddle that challenged logic. No known World War II-era submarine had been recorded as lost anywhere near this location. And yet here it was resting silently beneath the waves for nearly half a century. The dive team began a series of return expeditions. These were not quick dives. They required Tri-X gas blends, careful decompression stops, and meticulous planning. The risks were extreme. Divers could suffer from nitrogen narcosis, oxygen toxicity, or worst of all, the bends. But every dive brought back new clues. Inside the wreck, they found German gauges labeled in metric units, pipes, valves, and instrumentation. It was clearly a German U-boat. But which one? They retrieved small items, plates, bowls, bits of equipment. Some marked with the Marine Eagle, but nothing definitive. The turning point came when they discovered a butter knife, tarnished but intact, engraved with the name Hornberg, not a model number, a man's name. This changed everything. Using naval records and crew lists, the divers traced the name to a real person. Crewman Georg Hornberg, listed as having served on U-869. The divers kept digging both underwater and in the archives. On a later dive, they recovered valve manifolds and diesel engine parts with serial numbers. They traced these numbers to shipyard records from Desimag AG Weser, the German company that built U-869. The pieces matched. They had done it. Against all odds, these civilian divers had identified the mystery wreck. In 1997, 6 years after the first dive, the United States Navy officially acknowledged that the submarine wreck off New Jersey was indeed U-869. The implications were massive. U-869 had not been sunk near Gibraltar, as U.S. military records had claimed since 1945. It had died off the American East Coast, a full 3,000 m away from where history had placed it. The divers had proven what no wartime record ever did. They had physically located and identified the wreck. They had found the truth. And then there was the eerie realization. No one had been looking for U-869 here. If not for a handful of obsessed divers, it would still be rusting in anonymity, never telling its story. The U.S. Navy and historians took notice. Wreck divers around the world held it up as one of the greatest underwater identifications ever made without institutional support. No military, no government, just a crew of recreational divers, determination, and hundreds of dangerous hours on the ocean floor. But the mystery wasn't entirely solved. The big question still loomed. How did U-869 end up here? Its mission orders said Gibraltar. Wartime reports placed it in Europe. So, how did it end up on the wrong side of the Atlantic? Was it rerouted? Did it receive new secret orders? Or was there a failure in communication that caused it to go rogue? No records survived to answer that question. The marine logs were incomplete, and the men aboard U-869, every single one of them, had died with the submarine. A grave had been found. History seemed corrected. But the real mystery of U-869 was just beginning. Death by friendly fire or something worse. When salvage divers confirmed that the wreck off New Jersey was beyond any doubt German U-boat U-869, a new mystery surfaced. Why did it sink? The question seemed simple. But as divers explored the wreck and researchers re-examined the history, the answers only got murkier. Competing theories emerged, each backed by evidence, each with gaps that made the truth feel just out of reach. The two most prominent explanations, both widely debated to this day, are these. 1. U-869 was destroyed by its own weapon. 2. It was destroyed in combat by U.S. warships. Let's start with the first. German torpedoes in World War II were powerful, but they were far from perfect. Among their many issues was a terrifying malfunction, the circle runner. A torpedo designed to run straight would, due to a faulty gyroscope or control surface, curve into a wide arc, eventually looping back toward the very submarine that launched it. The result, a self-inflicted kill. This wasn't theoretical. It happened multiple times during the war, and every U-boat captain knew the risk. Supporters of the circle runner theory believe this is exactly what doomed U-869. They argue that after firing a torpedo, likely during combat or a test run, the weapon veered off course and circled back. Before the crew could react, it slammed into the side of their own sub. There's circumstantial evidence to back this up. First, there were no signs that U-869 ever engaged an enemy ship. No reports of torpedo strikes. No surviving records of an attempted attack. Second, the wreck shows significant internal blast damage consistent with a torpedo detonation close to or against the hull, but not a direct strike from outside. So, the U-869 might have sunk itself, but the theory isn't airtight. Another says that U-869 was located and destroyed by two U.S. Navy ships, the USS Howard D. Crowe and USS Coiner. According to this version, on February 11, 1945, the two vessels detected a submarine in the area, possibly through sonar or hydrophones. They launched a coordinated depth charge attack. After the war, this engagement was credited as the successful sinking of an unidentified U-boat, later believed to be U-869. The U.S. Navy's official records long listed this as the submarine's final fate. Even when the sub's remains were later found off New Jersey, the Navy maintained that it had still been their depth charges that caused the sinking. At first glance, this explanation seems straightforward, but it raises several difficult questions. First, the timing. U-869 had not been expected near the East Coast. Its mission orders were for Gibraltar. If the Navy ships had attacked a sub in that area, why didn't anyone connect it to U-869 sooner? Second, the wreck location itself. The site of the U-869 wreck does not precisely match the coordinates reported by the USS Howard D. Crowe and USS Coiner. It's close but not exact. Close enough to raise eyebrows, but far enough to cast doubt. Third, sonar scans and damage assessments. Divers who explored the wreck found that several torpedo tubes were still sealed. If U-869 had engaged in combat, why hadn't it fired all or any of its weapons? Why was it apparently caught off guard? As divers spent more time inside the sunken U-boat, the clues painted a conflicting picture. The forward section of the sub showed heavy damage, crushed inward, twisted by force. Some of the internal compartments were imploded, suggesting a shock wave from inside, not from a depth charge exploding nearby. At the same time, certain external parts of the hull showed deformation patterns that could align with pressure waves from a depth charge. But these marks are less severe than expected if the vessel had taken a direct hit from above. One observation stood out. The control room and torpedo room remained relatively intact. Damage was severe, but compartmentalized. This points toward a localized internal explosion, possibly a torpedo that detonated while still in the tube or shortly after launch. Adding to the confusion were the crew positions inside. Skeletal remains scattered over time suggested that no one made it to escape hatches. There was no attempt to surface. No signs of an emergency ascent. It happened fast, violently, without warning. Whatever hit U-869, whether from within or without, left the crew with zero time to respond. Adding to the mystery is the fact that military records from the time are inconsistent. U-869 was long thought to be nowhere near the U.S. coast, and the submarine allegedly sunk by American destroyers was never definitively identified. This leaves room for misidentification on both sides. Maybe the USS Howard Drow and USS Coiner did sink a U-boat but not U-869. Maybe U-869 was already gone by then, killed by a faulty torpedo days earlier. Or maybe, just maybe, both theories are wrong. You see, there's also the possibility that U-869 was sent on a classified mission with rerouted orders never logged officially. That would explain its unexpected location and radio silence. It might also explain the secrecy that surrounded its discovery, even years after the wreck was found. As evidence mounted, the answer became less and less definitive. Both theories fit and both had cracks. U-869's death was still a cold case. One detail that haunted the divers was that the torpedo tubes were still sealed. If the sub had engaged in combat, why hadn't it fired? If it was sunk by a circle runner, where's the launch record? And if it was ambushed, how could it have been caught with its weapons and used? The idea that U-869 was destroyed before ever launching a single shot makes the whole story even more tragic. It traveled thousands of miles under stealth only to die in silence, unable to even return fire. It also adds weight to a final unsettling thought. What was it doing off the U.S. coast in the first place? That question, the one no one could answer, would finally get a clue in the least expected way. Because just when they thought the mystery couldn't go any deeper, they opened a sealed compartment. The hidden chambers. For years, divers had explored the wreck of U-869 with the same set of risks and limitations. Depth, current, visibility, everything down there worked against them. But in late 2024, with newer equipment and more precise dive planning, a section of the submarine long deemed inaccessible was finally reached. Trust us, what salvage divers found inside the sunken Nazi Germany submarine will leave you speechless. It was a sealed compartment, collapsed in places, corroded nearly shut by pressure and time. According to members of the dive team who spoke under anonymity, this area had likely been undisturbed since the day U-869 hit the ocean floor in 1945. Inside, they discovered what one diver called a perfectly preserved time capsule. The compartment held personal lockers, locked storage crates, and footlockers still intact, some even with rubber seals barely holding. Among the recovered items were the standard remnants of life aboard a Nazi submarine. Ration tins, log books, and clothing. But then they found something far more unusual. Items that immediately drew attention from historians and intelligence officials alike. Sources familiar with the investigation described the discovery of a ceremonial dagger belonging to a Greggian officer. Its blade is said to be etched with a motto used by elite naval units. Next to it, folded in a watertight crate, was Age's marine dress uniform, still bearing the Iron Eagle insignia and a red armband with a swastika, preserved better than anyone thought possible. But what came next stunned even the most hardened researchers. Buried beneath layers of sealed documents wrapped in oilcloth was a box of Nazi memorabilia, including a pristine swastika flag folded with military precision. Alongside it were propaganda leaflets in English aimed at stirring discontent among the American public, and what appeared to be a partially encrypted codebook bearing markings from the ABV, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service. The find was so unexpected and so politically sensitive that it was never made public. The reason for the secrecy, the possibility that U-869 wasn't just patrolling the Atlantic. It may have been sent to deploy operatives or materials on U.S. soil. The theory remains unconfirmed, but the implications are chilling. A covert landing by a Nazi sub near the American coast, even at the tail end of the war, would rewrite what we thought we knew about German operations in the Western Hemisphere. But there is one more thing. Survivors' guilt. Of the 56 men assigned to U-869, all were believed to have died when the submarine sank sometime in early 1945. But there was one name missing from the final casualty list. A man who had been scheduled to be on board, but wasn't. His name was Herbert Gashowski. Herbert was originally assigned as a crew member aboard U-869 during its preparation for deployment, but due to an illness he contracted prior to the submarine's departure, he was removed from the mission. Another sailor took his place. U-869 left port without him. At the time, this change seemed minor, a standard personnel adjustment, but that single shift in assignment would go on to define the rest of his life. For decades, Gusky lived under the same assumption as military historians and the families of the fallen that U-869 had been lost near Gibraltar, most likely destroyed by Allied depth charges. That was the official record accepted by the German Navy and the post-war historical community. Then, in the 1990s, a group of American wreck divers searching the waters off Point Pleasant, New Jersey, discovered the remains of a sunken submarine. As part of their research, the divers began contacting surviving relatives of the original crew. Their efforts led them to Herbert, living in Germany, decades removed from the war, but still carrying the memory of those he had trained alongside. According to diver and researcher Richie Kohler, Herbert was initially skeptical when told that U-869 had been found not off Spain, but off the eastern coast of the United States. The news directly contradicted what he had been told and what he believed for over 50 years, but the evidence was undeniable. The divers presented photos of items recovered from the wreck, including personal belongings, technical components, and even a knife engraved with the name of Georg Hornberg, one of the crew members Herbert had known. Richie and fellow diver John Chatterton, who later co-authored the book Shadow Divers with Robert Kursanen, recalled their conversations with Herbert. He confirmed that the Hornberg identified through the knife engraving had indeed served on U-869. He also recalled the crew training in the atmosphere in the final weeks before the boat's departure. His illness had prevented him from sailing with the crew. It wasn't a dramatic event. No last-minute decision, no command override, just a matter of medical fitness. He had been replaced and the submarine had gone to sea without him. When asked how he felt about the discovery, Herbert was reportedly moved but subdued. He acknowledged the strange fortune that had spared his life and expressed sadness for the loss of his former comrades. He did not seek publicity. He did not give long interviews, but he did correspond with the divers and authors who worked on the U-869 story. His recollections helped verify crew identities and confirmed historical records from the German side, providing valuable insight into the sub's final crew makeup. Herbert passed away in 2005, and he never found out about the sealed chamber. Or maybe he already knew about it, just didn't want to speak. What do you think? Let us know in the comments.